we were talking backstage, and we were like, we hope we get some really spicy questions because, I mean, that's exactly what you would hope for at your conference, right? It's like very, crazy stuff. So, anyway, thank you all. This is a bit of an experiment. We have a couple of members of the React core team here. Meta has sent some people here to attend Remix Conf, and we're just super stoked that they're here to join us. Immediately to my right is Joe Savona. You might know Joe from a lot of work on Relay. He's en_JS on Twitter. Anything else you want to say to introduce what you kind of worked on?
Yeah, wait, this isn't a Relay talk?
No, not a Relay talk.
I've been working on Relay worked on Relay for a while, and then recently kind of switched to work on React. So thanks for letting me attend this.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming. Yeah. And then, of course, Dan spoke to us earlier today. Dan does a lot of things. Redux back in the day, but done a lot of work on the React docs and everything. I think that was the first time I ever met you was 2015, React Europe. Yeah. We were in Paris, right? And it kind of blew my mind when he went like back and forward. Anybody remember that talk? Where he was like rewind and forward? Yeah, that was pretty like, what? Who is this guy? So yeah, that was the first time I met Dan. Anything else you want to say about what you're currently working on, or?
I'm not sure. I guess like the last thing I was working on was docs with Rachel, and right now I'm just talking to people, I think.
That's right. Cool. And then last but not least, Rick Hanlon. I think the first time I met Rick was React Conf, like 2018, I want to say, something like that, or 2019, yeah. In Las Vegas. So it's been cool getting to know Ricky over the years. Honestly, probably the member of the panel that I know the least, though, about. So tell us a little bit about what you've been working on. And
I joined Facebook right after we met at React Conf. I had accepted my offer and hadn't been in yet. I worked on React Native for a couple of years. I built Logbox. I worked on then switched to the React team. Worked on React 18. We worked on the React working groups, the React docs, all kinds of stuff. Just
awesome.
Like lots of odds and ends.
Awesome.
You forgot to say where we met.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Do you remember?
Joe and I met at a Telmate meetup
Yep.
in San Francisco.
The first React SF meetup.
And Devin was there.
Devin hosted it.
Yeah,
yep.
you guys did. Yeah. So
back in 2014, it was like the very first.
Almost 10 years ago.
You were talking about
dude.
React Router. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, so there was a React meetup in San Francisco, and I was like, oh, cool. I was living in San Francisco at the time. Like, oh, cool. I'll go and talk about this React Router thing that Ryan and I have been working on. And Joe got up. I remember you got up at the meetup, and you were like, React needs a router. We need to have a router. Yep. And then I got up, and I was like, we built a router. And so that's how we met. Yep. But that was cool. Yeah, good times. Yeah. Cool. Again, really just stoked that these guys joined me today. I wanted to, just kind of talk. Part of the reason for this panel is, there's a lot of stuff that goes on at Meta on React. Like, there's a lot of different stuff, and there's a lot of different people there that work on it. You can imagine there's, documentation and community outreach. There's like different facets. There's React Native, obviously. There's React itself. There's like the data loading piece. There's Relay. There's just so much stuff that goes on. And I think sometimes our conversation is like a little bit, kind of narrow on like just certain topics, right? So like the one that everybody wants to talk about today is React Server Components and RSC. It's a very hot topic. But there's a lot more stuff that's going on at Meta. But like, let's just talk about React Server Components, and then we'll get that out of the way, and then we'll talk about everything else, right?
Okay.
So I was wondering if this is just, again, if any of y'all have questions, please like raise your hand and we'll get it. But I just have a couple questions to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit. So could you tell us a little bit about React Server Components? The main motivation, and what you think is so interesting about it. Dan, I feel like you said a lot in your talk today about it. Either of you guys have anything to add to that?
I feel like that was a pretty good. I mean, that was a great talk, right? Just
Yeah, that's cool.
maybe not
bit-
quite
a bit
meeting a
long.
usual bar, but you know,
Yeah.
you know, it's still. Kidding.
I mean, it feels like a lot of. It felt like it was a good way to present it because it was like, you know, let's imagine this evolving as a server-first language. Let's imagine it sort of evolving over time, right? And then thinking about the client as like an afterthought, right?
Well, I wouldn't say like an afterthought. I think it's, and I think that is the part that like is really hard with the naming, right? Because like a lot of people when they hear server components, they think like, for example, even people who use them might think, oh, I have to convert the entire thing. Like every component I have, like I have to try to convert it, or that it's like client components are an escape hatch or something like this. But it's really not how we think about it. It's more about having this shared language between parts that live in different places, and you just, you know, you can put all of it on one side, you can put all of it on the other side, you can put half and half, you can keep moving things as you like, and it's like the paradigm is this freedom to move stuff around. It's not that like we're now on the server, and then like the word server is also, we're kind of overloading because like it runs at the build time, for example, like in Next.js by default it's build time and not server. So I think like it's, I wouldn't say like, even like in this vision of like, imagine we got there through server first, it wouldn't be that like client is an afterthought. It's like client is a very important piece where you want fast interactions. And like server is like important piece where you want to do stuff ahead of time. And let's just get these things talking to each other in a way that kind of is natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say it makes sense to kind of like think about a component when you're writing React Server components as like, you know, by default, all of the components that we write are going to run on the server, right? Like.
I'd say not quite. I think
Yeah.
this is actually kind of interesting, and it's tricky to wrap your mind around how it works, just in terms of like how to use it. I feel like not because it's like very complicated or you need to remember some arcane rules. I think it's more like learning to ride a bicycle or learning to, you know, knit in. So it's like this like muscle memory thing where you learn to do a thing that like once you learn it, it's like, oh, I get it now, but then it's very hard to explain what you learned. And like one of these things is exactly like, for example, in, you know, generally if you build an app with like fully server components, it's not that every component is server component by default, it's more that the root of the app is server, and there is a very simple reason for it, is because it has to run first. So server is
Because they're going to send HTML to the client.
Yeah, because you have to send HTML, or, you know, we also have this other representation that we use to update without blowing away, you know, how like reloads blow away the state. But it's just that the server is the entry point for like, that's when everything starts.
Yeah.
But then you can immediately return the client component and kind of, you know, go to. So
but you don't get a web page at all without like talking to the server.
It's got to be somewhere. And I think like the part that is a bit confusing is like when you create a component, what, you know, when you just add a new component, what kind of it is it? And it's really determined by where it's being used from. So it's kind of like, it's if you import it from a server component, like I did with like this markdown, like this markdown thing is on NPM, like I didn't touch it. I just imported it and it worked in server environment because it didn't use client features. So it's kind of like contextual to which world you're importing it from. And then if some features are like they don't work in the other world, you get a build error and then you decide where to cut things off to be like in this other world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think when you're working, it feels really natural. You start writing a component.
Not immediately. Like
right,
you
not
have
immediately.
to.
Yeah. Like what kind of once you get used to it, you know, oh, I'm working on something interactive. I start using state. That I get a build error. I put use client, and then I just move on with my day. And you know, you don't really have to break out of the flow, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's one thing that I love. I've always loved about React is how it like keeps you in the flow. Of you know, I remember back in the day people saying like, well, what are you using for like data in your React components? And back then it was like this not state and all the lifecycle methods. And like what are you using, like an ORM, or like do you have like your models over here and your controller over here and your view over here? Like it, but I was like, no, this component kind of feels like all three. Like the state feels like keeps you in the flow, right? Keeps you in the, from going into different files. So I love that sentiment. Cool. Anything else that we wanted to cover on that topic? Any other questions from the audience on that topic? Yeah, we've got a question over here. Do we have a mic?
Yep, Mike is here. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Oh, go first.
Signals. When are signals coming? Is this a troll or is this a real question? Oh. Okay, it's a real question. All right. No, I just got to check. I just got to check.
All right. Yeah, we want to do signals. We can do signals. Yeah. So I think that signals. There's probably two things that people are kind of wondering about when they ask about signals, and that's probably developer experience and performance. The developer experience piece is I don't want to have to declare dependencies, right? I don't want to have to think about just kind of like stale closures and things like that. The performance piece is that signals are kind of designed to do the minimal amount of work. When you change some state, you can kind of do the minimal amount of work. And I think that signals are one way to attack both of those problems, right? But they have their own trade-offs. And so what we've seen with the bewildering number of libraries that have adopted signals, I think it's everyone but us. Did I get that right? Yeah. Is that they make some really, there's some real developer experience trade-offs there, and it just becomes a different way of thinking about your code. And so Solid is a great library, and I think it's also like a very emblematic of this like kind of signals-based approach. But if you're used to working with React, it is a bit different, and so your components run once. So if you early return from a function, that's it. None of the other code will ever run again. So that is a very different way of working than React. And we think that the React style is a bit easier to reason about. And so what we're doing is kind of looking at those two problems and saying, OK, how can we hear you about the developer experience pain points of declaring dependency arrays. And so we have a bunch of ideas planned for like improvements to hooks. Some new hooks coming that will kind of alleviate that. Also looking at compilation to automatically fill in the dependency arrays. On the performance side, we're working on Forget, which is a compiler that will kind of automatically memoize and achieve kind of what we hope, making sure that your app is kind of re-rendering the minimal amount possible as you change state. So kind of two different approaches to tackling those two different problems, but while still retaining the same familiar React programming model that you're used to.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. It feels like signals are, it's just a different model, right?
Yeah,
it's like, like when I played with Solid, it totally messed with my mind coming from, because I've used React for years, and I guess I just expected it to work like React.
Right.
And it wasn't until after I started using it I realized, oh, there's no virtual DOM here.
Right.
Completely different model, right? Oh, there's no, like, this is not like set state at all. This is like a broadcast into that little node there telling it, hey, something changed.
Yep.
Go and update. So
I would maybe like slightly, I think like there's, like virtual DOM is not like the important part from like it's, I hate the term because like everybody means something different by it, but it's, that is an implementation detail of like how exactly you work with the code. The thing that signals changes is more than implementation detail. It changes, like you can't write a bunch of code that it's just like, I think early returns is a good example. Just like in React, when you write if is logged in, return dashboard, else return something else, then like if the result of the render would be the same regardless of if it renders for the first time or like for the 10th time. So it doesn't matter how many times it runs. It's just whatever the props are, you look at the condition, you look at the return, you see what the UI should be. So it kind of, like React kind of removes time from the equation. With Signals, it's a bit different because your component is kind of like a constructor. And so it really, like if you have top-level conditions, like if is logged in, return dashboard, it kind of means like that just runs the first time. And from that point on, like, you have to use like different patterns to regain the same kind of dynamic thing. And so we we just don't like this very much, and we do like the targeted, the fact that it can, by default it doesn't over-render, like it's very granular, but then there is a price for that, which is, we can't be as expressive, and we'd like to remain expressive, so the way we would like to do this is more like on the compilation side, and then for things, like there are cases where you want some kind of, maybe we miss some primitives for kind of deep like updates between like different parts of the tree that like don't pass through.
People
like
do that with context now. Right?
Yeah, and like sometimes if you don't kind of unwrap it, like if you don't care about what the value is in the middle, we could maybe provide better primitives for that, but we would like to explore that after we solve like the main cases with the compiler, because you never know like how important it is until you've exhausted like what we think is the primary approach to this problem.
Got it.
That's something that I really appreciate about the approach of the team when I joined, is just seeing how we could just like add signals. It wouldn't be it'd be fairly trivial to add it, but digging deep as a value to figure out like what is the problem that it's solving, what is the best way to solve that problem, what trade-offs are there for other things that we could be doing.
Well, and it's okay to have opinions too, right? And to be like, we don't need to adopt every,
But it's also not new, right? I think like there is a big push for it, but
yeah.
it's been around since like 2013. Like first state libraries for React, many were signals based.
I feel like, and you might disagree, but I feel like computed properties in Ember are kind of very similar to signals. Yeah.
The one
I had a bad experience working with computed properties.
Yeah, I think maybe like philosophically where we land is that the signals as an implementation detail is fine, right? So for example, if a compiler could detect that a prop you're passing from way up top is only used way down in some leaf component, and we can just transparently turn that into a signal and get the same benefits, that's fine. What we don't, where we kind of disagree, is that signals shouldn't be a kind of first-class part of the programming model that you kind of have to actually think about. Like, oh, I have a signal, and Solid kind of tries to hide it, but it's not fully hidden, and you see that with the early return. And so I think for us, starting with compilation and then maybe having signals as an implementation detail down the road is like more where we're going.
Yeah, can you have your cake and eat it too?
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned briefly React Forget.
Yes.
Now that is something that I don't know if a lot of people in here have actually heard about React Forget. I saw a tiny demo of it when we were on a call a couple months ago. Let me tell what I think it is, and you can correct me because I'm going to butcher it. But I think the basic idea is like, Joe described it as a reactivity compiler, right? So you've got certain values, like you've got like a use memo, for example, which is a value that you recompute only when certain things change, right? Because maybe it's expensive to compute, so that's why. React Forget, it will come in the compiler step, and it will see that use memo, and it can say, oh, I know how to like unwind this so that you don't actually need a runtime use memo function. I can just write some JavaScript here that will have the exact same effect. And I think the hope is, is the goal to rewrite it in regular JavaScript so that you can like essentially eliminate parts of the runtime?
Yeah, so it's kind of what you said. So the idea is actually that developers don't have to write use callback or use memo at all. That they would disappear as a concept.
Got it.
And then the compiler kind of figures out which values are kind of created independently and can kind of wrap them in the appropriate memoization. A lot of people think that this is a simple Babel plugin. It is not a simple Babel plugin. But you can certainly try. So this really sophisticated analysis of the code. It relies on like a deep understanding of the rules of React. So the idea that render is kind of pure or idempotent, for example, we rely on the fact that any hook you call might be wrapped in a use memo, and so there's kind of some very specific. I don't want to get into the details here, but like there's specific rules about React, and so the compiler can kind of take advantage of those to figure out where you might be constructing a value and where you're just kind of using it. and use that to memoize at like very fine-grained units. And yeah, like under the hood, that is not using, it's not compiling to a use memo call, so we don't have to, pay the cost of allocating a dependency array. So the idea is that you should, the hope is you'd get roughly the same kind of performance as a very well manually memoized application out of the box by default without having to think about those concepts.
Yeah. Very cool. No, very cool. So, yeah, go ahead, Dan. You want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think there's a very interesting kind of parallel there where like when people talk about signals and reactivity, there's often this kind of like understanding of like React, that React is not like reactive, like React is, and I mean like I kind of thought that too, but
not like CycleJS. That's
not
really
in that sense. Right. Yeah, but I think like what people mean is React seems like very not granular, right? Like you update something and we just like recompute, what we can't prove that it hasn't changed. But I think there is if you look at these, for example, if you look at Solid again, right? Like the thing you said about like in Solid, the mental model is that it's really only your template that is reactive unless like you specifically opt into things. So in the general, like in the reactivity models, there's usually this notion of like computed. So like you have this, you have a thing you calculate from two other things, and you kind of have to declare it or like somehow like work in a special way with it. And I think there is this just funny kind of thought that like, in a way, React is like overreactive. It is because that is a philosophical position too, because we think there is no separation between the template and your like rendering logic. For us, it's like it's your component logic. Like JSX is not special. Like your full name equals first name plus space plus last name should not be treated differently from having that in your template. And so that is, and from that perspective, like in React, everything is reactive. But because JavaScript, like in JavaScript values, when create an object, even if nothing changed, like it's still, it's a new object. It's like if you use this comparison of like, is it the same object or not, as a way to determine if something changed, by default with JavaScript semantics, it just seems like everything changes all the time. And so we lose that information. And so the purpose of forget is to recapture that information back and actually only kind of propagate like changes down when there are actually changes, but without compromising on the, you just pass raw values like Boolean strings and so on.
I mean, who hasn't been in that situation before where they've like used an object in state and then they set a new object and they realize like, oh shoot, now the whole thing is re-rendering, even though nothing in the, I mean, you all have like learned this by heart now, right? Nothing in the object actually changed, but for some reason there's a new object there, and so that's when you throw in a use memo and everything else. So, really cool stuff. Which is, hopefully that sheds some light on a topic that some of you might not have known was actually going on.
Well, I think also it's worth calling out, like, there's a lot of discussion, obviously, about server components, and a lot of folks have asked us, like, what about client-side React? And like, the whole point of Forget is client-side React. That's just like 4 people working for quite a while on building a compiler, all focused on client-side React developer experience and performance. So definitely very much like a lot of things happening.
Yeah, client-side React is still evolving, right? It's not like the whole React team is like, how do we figure out the server side of things? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Well, even for the server stuff, we try to layer it in a way that there are parts that are like client-only, then there are like parts that are SSR, then there are parts that server components. So like, whenever a feature makes sense, like to have some layer below, we try to like make it work on all layers.
We have a question here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, in the back.
Wait, where are we?
Here.
There's a few.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Hi there. Juan from the Hydrogen team in Shopify. So we have a bit of an experience with React Server Components, and one of the tricky things that we discovered is observability. In the context of being able to fetch data anywhere in the tree in a server component, and how there is this point where having too many server components. We spoke a little bit about this yesterday, Dan. So, but I think it's nice to get everyone to hear your views. But yeah, at some point, putting too much into the server has a diminishing return. With sometimes it's convenient, or it's better to actually create some client components to reduce the payload sizes of RSC. So yeah, like, do you see the team at Meta as being responsible for creating some observability tools, or is this going to be probably more in the framework side or collaboration? And also, yeah, is there going to be a way for the user to detect when at what point you should start putting more client code versus server-side code? Thank you.
Great question.
So maybe I can try to answer
Yeah, sure,
this
go
one.
for it.
Yeah, so to kind of, if I understood correctly, the question is like, okay, if we have these tools, we can put some components on the server only, we can put some components on the client. How do we decide what the balance is, and also how do we understand, like, what kind of new performance problems does it create? And I think like Hydrogen kind of got burned on like client server components very early when we just didn't know answers to a lot of stuff. And actually, like, Hydrogen's feedback was crucial to the changes that we did. So that like we're actually like very thankful. I think there's like one kind of problem that's like not super obvious is as you move more of like logic to the server, then your data connection can get more chatty, right? Because like you used to just return the JSON, and now you return like UI output. So like if you have like, I don't know, 20 Tailwind classes, and then like that is in the server component, and then you render like 500 of them. Okay, maybe like gzip does the job, so compression also factors.
Dan said at Remix Conf, don't use Tailwind.
No, I love That's wait. That's actually the opposite. Like that's
what I got from it.
It's actually really good.
Yeah,
but the thing is, like, I think it's not obvious sometimes that client components, like, they're also a feature, right? Like it's you have this thing that's like repeated a lot, and you just kind of slap use client on it, and then it turns into a template in the sense that now you download a bit more code, but that code can produce the same things, many times. So it's kind of like template versus, because like now you got a new tool, you got new trade-offs.
Yeah.
And I think in practice, like we probably, I don't really see us building like tools that like usually when we do build tools, like they're very integrated into the meta stack. So I think this is something that like the community and frameworks will have like an opportunity to do. You could imagine kind of component-centered tooling. Like imagine you had a like an analyzer that can, maybe can be fed with production data or specific interactions. But imagine if you had like the kind of profiling tooling that is focused on components, where you could see not just like the bundle size, but like which components kind of drag into those dependencies that contribute to the bundle size. And the same way, you could see like which components are most kind of contributing to the data payload when it moves between the boundaries. So it's definitely like a very new space.
That's an expensive component, right?
Yeah.
Like
So this is like a new kind of expensive. So it's, we'll see if there are like new tools for that.
Cool. Great question, JP. Thank you.
Another question here.
In the back.
Hey guys. So first off, congrats on launching the new docs. I know for spiciness, the Create React app thing was interesting, the conversation that went around. And it was cool to see the output of like, hey, there's Next and there's Remix and there's all these people that you collaborate with all the time. So my question is TypeScript. So I know Dan, you and Matt of Total TypeScript had a conversation about a month ago about who's maintaining the definitely typed React code, and looking at Create React app leaving and all these frameworks now being very TypeScript first focused. What is your relationship as a React core team? What is your relationship with TypeScript? And how are you trying to work with them? And both, like everybody uses TypeScript nowadays, it seems like. So like, what's your relationship with that? And how are you looking at these new features and how to make sure the types are accurate? And I know it's, from my understanding, an independent team that's maintaining the types. And so how are you bringing them into the conversation more to help? make sure that TypeScript works well with React.
Yeah, Joe uses a lot of TypeScript.
Yeah, so actually the forget compiler is written in TypeScript. I'm a personal fan. We've had a bunch of really great conversations with the folks, like the TypeScript folks, and just kind of about better supporting React, kind of understanding what their roadmap is and things like that. So definitely just big fans of TypeScript in general, and I think we definitely recognize that. Obviously, React itself is written in Flow. We understand that most people don't use Flow. That's fine.
I was going to ask about Flow.
Yeah,
is that kind of like taking a bit of a backseat, or is Facebook still invested?
Yeah, so we're still invested internally in Flow, but we've kind of pivoted Flow to focus really just on the internal use cases.
Yeah.
And so we recognize that in the community, TypeScript is the de facto choice. Obviously, fine if you don't want to use TypeScript, that's cool too. But I think we all are probably aligned that. We think that we should really be defining and owning the definitions for React. That's like kind of on us. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, one thing to call out there is that the core team does maintain the types now. Sebastian Silberman, Sebi, sorry if I didn't pronounce your last name right. He's on the core team, and he maintains the types for us and has just pushed through a really important change to the types. So even though they don't live in the React core code base right now, they are maintained by us, and we are increasingly giving more input into what the types are.
I would say that like every new API, at least since hooks, was designed with TypeScript in mind. So like we always check, that it works in TypeScript. Yeah. I think it's just that the one difficulty is historically there is just a bunch of stuff in the typings that doesn't quite match how we think about. And part of it is, just kind of historical baggage. Part of it is limitations of like TypeScript JSX support. Part of it is, just like mistakes that were done along the way. And so, for example, like Sebastian Silberman, he did a pretty significant change in React 18 as part of React 18. So I know a lot of TypeScript users were kind of annoyed that it was a bit hard to upgrade to 18, but actually like it fixed the flaw, it fixed the mistake in the typings. And so I think it is important to understand, as a community that, if there is a desire for the React team to get more involved with the typings, it will mean that we will make breaking changes when the typings are not correct. And so that is a cost that, that's associated with it. But we definitely want to move in that direction. We want to own the types, we want to document the types, and yeah.
And one thing I will add is that on the React Native side, we are exporting the types and maintain the types in the code base directly. And the template now installs TypeScript by default. All of the examples on the React Native website offer you examples in TypeScript. So that's kind of more evidence that we're investing more and more in TypeScript.
Yeah, TypeScript first APIs. We've been experiencing the exact same thing over in Remix land. I think I was learning TypeScript when I was writing React Router 6, and so I don't think it did a great job. So I was like just figuring it out for the first time. But it's been a huge focus for us for Remix v3 as well. Just thinking in those terms first. It's just such a huge help.
With server components as well, like because we had like earlier proposals, kind of more similar to some of the Remix stuff with like, where you call a hook, like use data or something like this.
Yeah.
But like part of the consideration against it was like difficulties with types.
Yeah.
And we kind of settled on this model where the only thing you can do is pass props, and that just dissolves this whole thing.
Yeah. Cool, I think we have time for maybe 2 more. Chance, is that you? What's up, dude? Wait for the mic. Shruti's on her way.
Coming.
There he is.
Go Shruti.
Yeah, back to React Forget for a second. I'm really interested in that project, and one thing I'm wondering is if you've started to explore debugging in that sort of environment. The one thing I sort of worry about is when you start hiding things behind a compiler, they get obscured to the point where when something doesn't work as expected, it's hard to figure out why.
Yep.
Dan, you had mentioned community involvement in tooling in terms of observability for server components, but with something like the compiler with React Forget, it seems like it might be more of an internal meta or React team concern. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, how are we thinking about debugging for Forget? It's been something we've thought about very much from the beginning, and we see kind of a few stages to Forget. The first being kind of just getting the first version out there, where the actual output of the compiler is kind of designed to be more debuggable. So for example, once you kind of have like an idea of what Forget is doing, console.log does something very sensible and predictable. And so if your console.log is running, it means that that value that you're logging is being reevaluated if it's not running. So there's a predictable semantic that you can begin to understand and use to debug. The code is we're not doing like crazy reordering and things like that. So a lot of things that are going into making it more predictable. But longer term, we also see probably even having a React language server, like an IDE integration, so a language server in the technical term. So that you can actually have much more feedback in your IDE about what's going on. Our understanding of the code is even more sophisticated than what the current ESLint rules can do, and so we can suggest to you, oh, like maybe you want to refactor your code in this way because it'll memoize better, or things like that. And so that'll also help. And then we'll definitely have to integrate with dev tools. So and that again, that may end up being a community involvement. But I think the language server side is definitely something that we're thinking about working on, not committed to yet, but something that we are thinking about. But yeah, certainly developer experience has got to be, it has to actually be predictable for developers. And we are pretty happy with the model that we've come up with. We think it is pretty predictable. Once you kind of work with Forget a little bit, you kind of begin to develop an intuition. And I think that that's actually probably the most important thing, is that if it's actually predictable to the developer, and we think we've got that. So, but yeah, definitely something we're thinking about.
I would maybe add that, because I'm not involved with the project, I'm just observing. So I do feel like it is interesting because, again, like the compile target is not something that's some inscrutable like bytecode or whatever. It just really rewrites your code in a way that maybe, like for some people, I think might actually feel more natural because like you think, I just changed this thing, like why does this re-render? And then Forget like rewrites it to say, if this thing changed, like recalculate this piece, otherwise don't. So you kind of feel like, oh, I see, yeah, makes sense. Like so when you debug it, there is a feeling that it kind of does what maybe you would do yourself, but it's just too annoying to write by hand.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of like GPT feeling to it.
Yeah,
like
that's cool. It's helping me, right? It's helping me out.
And I'm also excited just about because it really understands the data flow. So it kind of understands this thing depends on this thing, depends on this thing. So I actually think like it can serve as a foundation for much deeper developer tools that, for example, can say, why did this render? Well, because like this thing recomputed on this line, this thing recomputed on this line, and so on. And that's the kind of insight you don't even have today. Yeah. That's something that could be built in principle.
Yeah, I think the piece that we really need for the developer experience that I think you're kind of alluding to, the sort of the actual output is, I think, pretty readable. And then the kind of magical piece is, okay, but this Forget says that if these three things change, recompute this. Why is it those three things, right? And that's the part where we kind of need like IDE tooling to be able to say, oh, we group them because of this line over here where you're modifying two values together, or doing some operation. And so that's the piece that we'll need. But yeah, we think we can build that.
Well, that, and I think a lot of us have spent years getting used to object identity as sort of the source of truth for why something changed.
Yeah.
And now we're sort of going.
It's built in.
We've spent so much time internalizing that where now we have to unwind that a bit. So
exactly.
It'd be nice though if we didn't have to think in terms of identity.
No, I mean, trust me, I'd love it. Just have to unprogram.
I'm telling Ryan all the time, like, remember this .set state? That was so nice. Like, it was. There was something really nice about that model. I'd never thought about object identity in React 14. 14, yeah, that's what we call it still. Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah,
I think maybe we've all come a long way in terms of just like understanding React. It
Yeah.
was always a concept, right?
It was always there.
Should component update relied on object identity, right?
Well, I
as
remember
a
the
big
mutable
effort.
JS folks. I remember
Right,
Lee
right.
getting up on stage talking about it, and I was
right.
like, "Yeah, that's weird. I don't care. I've never had to worry about that." I was naive at the time, but yeah, I agree. We've come a long way.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's just about time to wrap it up. We might have time for one more if it's quick. Can't be a big long question.
Okay, quick question.
Gotta be quick. All right. Who do we
Okay,
got?
it's slightly spicy, but I'll make it short. So for a long time, Facebook and React were like analogous in my mind, right? And now like a lot of the early React people have moved on. And so I'm just wondering like
Where do they work
politically-
now, Cameron?
Yeah.
Where do they work?
Who wins in a dispute over like React's future direction, you know?
So you're basically asking, is the future direction of React determined by Vercel now?
That's what I'm asking. Well, who? Facebook or Vercel or
Just get it out.
the
Just rip the
community?
Band-Aid
Like
off.
who's
It feels so
winning?
much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry if I've misinterpreted you, but I think that's kind of what we're saying.
That was what I was asking. Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, let's talk. So let's talk about the relationship between Meta and Vercel, and Meta and Shopify. I guess I can speak to that.
Yeah. So I think it's honestly a great development that the direction of React is no longer being set solely by Meta. The fact that we are now actually really a truly multi-company effort. And it's important to note that there are several core contributors who are not at either Meta or Vercel. Sophie Alpert, you already talked about, Sevi, who are now independent, right? So it's also just not, it's not correct that it's just Meta and Vercel. It's actually already a kind of multi-pronged effort. And so I think that's working really well. I mean, obviously, it has been a change, right, over the last year or so for us to kind of like rethink how we work as a team. The team has also grown significantly. We have a bunch of new people joining on the Meta side. So in addition to kind of becoming a multi-company group, we've also had just a much larger core team. So we're kind of going through like kind of a growing phase on the team with the associated growing pains. But I'm really excited about this as like the beginning of a new phase kind of for React. And we're working, one of the things we're kind of working on now is how do we like kind of more formalize this new way of working. And we don't, I think we've gotten some fair criticism about Vercel having appearing to kind of be in like a privileged position. Well, Seb and Andrew have been working on React since forever, and so they're deeply ingrained in React.
Yeah.
We'd love to get more people into that position too, and who don't necessarily have to, and that shouldn't have to be the only on ramp to working on React. Shouldn't be that you work at Meta or Vercel, and so we kind of want to figure out how do we make it more possible for other folks to kind of ramp up as contributors. I think a thing we're really looking at there is how do we work more with frameworks and libraries, which, hey, how's it going? Why we're here.
One example is that we announced last week was the Canary releases,
right?
And making it possible to kind of expand from the only testing at Meta that we used to do. To being able to test with the community and test with frameworks and make sure that practically we're able to actually all build together.
Totally.
Because you can use the canaries.
Yeah, that was cool.
Can I add a few
sorry, go ahead,
things? Yeah, I think like it's a tricky topic because I think like people have points. Like there are things I dislike about Vercel. Like I don't like their marketing. I feel like it's very kind of in your face, and sometimes it's like it's kind of not like as restrained as I associate with the React brand, for example. But there is I think there are also a lot of misconceptions, and I think it might be helpful to just. I think a lot of people don't really know how the React team works in general, and I think that is creating this this kind of perception. And it's the way we work is we try to listen to a lot of like a lot of things we've heard over the years, like a lot of issues we've read. Like for example, like server components is kind of influenced by like 10 different things and like things from like 10 years ago almost, and so on. So It's like we try to have like a very broad understanding of like the space in which we want to work, and sometimes we just see how different things can connect together in a very kind of satisfying solution that we can build. And then when we do that, previously this was only happening internally at Meta. So we would need to find the client. So like Meta doesn't tell the React team what to do. It's more like an agency-client relationship where the React team kind of acts as an agency where we steer the direction, but also we need somebody to try our stuff, because like we don't know if the idea is good. We don't know if it's going to survive the real world. And so it's this like symbiotic relationship where we find one team at Meta that's willing to try something that's like unstable, can fall apart, might be like removed later, and they provide feedback, and we kind of just tune it up and figure out how to make it better. And eventually we see, okay, like maybe like 10 different teams can try it, or like maybe the entire company can try it. And like a year later, maybe you see it in the open source release as open source React. And so you only see the final kind of polished product, but you don't see the process. And the thing that's happening now is that this process is being opened up. Because, for example, like Vercel, working on Next.js and integrating React Server components there, that's been happening in the open. And that is exactly the same process where Vercel acts as a client. Because like Next.js, it's a framework. It needs like server features. It wants to integrate deeper with React. And from React perspective, what when we put on the React hats, even people who work on Vercel, like their goal is to prove out the paradigm, figure out how the pieces should fit, and like figure out how to make React better. And this collaboration started like several years ago, and I think on the one hand I get a lot of criticisms of Vercel. On the other hand, it just gets under my skin when people say, oh, like Vercel is telling the React team what to do. Well, like actually the
React team is telling Vercel what to do.
It's more complicated, but the reality is Vercel has invested years into building out our vision, and like when Sebastian left Meta, if Vercel was not building a server components framework, he would have gone somewhere else that would have been that client that would have been willing to build it.
Yeah, so he could still like work on the thing that he was interested in.
Yeah, because he's building the architecture. Like he knows what he wants to do, and there needs to be a place to prove it out. Yeah, and so that's kind of part of it. Like they've invested years of like full-time engineering time into proving out our direction. And we appreciate that, and we want to extend that to more companies as well.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Well, cool, thank you. Thanks for asking the question, Cameron. Good job. We are out of time, but please give Ricky and Dan and Joe a big hand for joining us today.
Thank you.